If you close your eyes and imagine Halloween now, you might picture plastic pumpkins, bright costumes, doorbells, and buckets full of candy. But in the 1800s, it was different. Quieter, stranger, softer somehow. Let's go back there together, to a night wrapped in mist and the smell of wood smoke. It's the middle of the 19th century. The air is cool, and the wind carries the sound of dry leaves scraping across cobblestones. The gas lamps flicker. Somewhere, a church bell strikes 9. A young woman walks down a narrow street with a small lantern in her hand. Her dress brushes against the damp ground. She's not trick-or-treating. That idea hasn't yet been born. She's going to visit her friend to tell fortunes by candlelight. Because that was what Halloween meant back then. Mystery, superstition, and the thin edge between the living and the dead. Halloween in the 1800s was a night of divination, a night when people tried to peek into the future, to find out who they would marry, or what the next year might bring. In Scotland and Ireland, where many of these traditions began, young women might peel an apple in one long spiral and throw the peel over their shoulder. Whatever shape it made on the floor, that was said to be the first letter of her future husband's name. Others would hold a candle and a mirror in a darkened room, hoping to glimpse the face of their future love behind them. Some would melt lead or wax and pour it into water, watching how it hardened, each shape a symbol of something yet to come. It wasn't about fear, not really. It was about curiosity, about the strange beauty of the unknown. Halloween wasn't a children's holiday. It was a night for adults, for laughter and stories, and maybe a little trembling in the dark. In small towns, people gathered by the fire and told ghost stories, not the jump scare kind, but slow, eerie tales passed down for generations. Stories of phantom horsemen, of lights seen in graveyards, of travelers who vanished into the mist. And all through the villages and farms, the smell of autumn filled the air. Turnips roasting, potatoes baking, bonfires crackling in distant fields. Because in the old Celtic tradition, this night was Samhain, the end of the harvest, the turning of the year. People believed that on this night, the barrier between the living and the dead grew thin. Spirits could wander for a while, and so fires were lit to keep them warm, and offerings of food were left on doorsteps, just in case the dead were passing by. It wasn't frightening, not really. It was gentle, respectful, like lighting a candle for someone you miss. Children might carve faces into hollowed-out turnips, placing candles inside, small ghostly faces glowing in the dark. The pumpkins would come later, when Irish immigrants brought these traditions to America and found the big orange gourds waiting in the fields. But here, in the 1800s, the faces were rough, carved by hand, lit by tallow candles that dripped and sputtered. They weren't decorations for a party. They were small guardians of the night. If you were to walk through a village then, you'd see flickering lights in windows, hear the muffled laughter of people playing fortune games, and smell the mix of earth and smoke and sweet cider. Halloween wasn't loud. It was quiet, thoughtful, almost sacred. A night to think about time and change, and how the world turns from life to death and back again. So as you lie here now, imagine the soft glow of lamplight on wooden walls, the sound of a kettle bubbling, and the murmur of people telling stories by the hearth. That's where it began, before the candy, before the costumes, before Halloween became a festival of lights and laughter. It began as a whisper in the dark, a soft flicker of belief that the world was wider and more mysterious than anyone could quite explain.
Imagine a ship creaking on a gray sea. The year is somewhere around 1845. Families huddled together, carrying trunks filled with clothes, small keepsakes, and a few memories from home. Among them are people from Ireland and Scotland, and in their hearts they carry Halloween, though they wouldn't quite call it that yet. To them, it's Samhain, or All Hallows' Eve, the night when the old year ends and the spirits walk. They bring those customs across the Atlantic, not realizing they're bringing a piece of ancient Europe into the New World. When they arrive, America is a vast, changing place. Forests stretching to the horizon, small towns built around mills and rivers, and cities swelling with immigrants, industry, and promise. Halloween isn't well known here yet. The old Puritan settlers in New England didn't celebrate it. To them, it seemed suspicious, a pagan relic. But slowly, in immigrant neighborhoods, the old traditions take root again. At first, it's private. Families gather by candlelight and tell ghost stories from back home. They carve lanterns, not from pumpkins yet, but from turnips, potatoes, and beets, the same way they did in the old country. And just like before, they tell fortunes. A group of young Irish girls might drop melted wax into cold water and watch the shapes it makes, guessing what lies ahead. Boys might pull cabbage stalks from the field because, they said, the shape of the stalk would tell them the shape of their future spouse. Meanwhile, across the small towns of America, people are hearing about this strange Halloween night. It sounds spooky and exciting, and little by little, it spreads. By the 1860s and 1870s, the newspapers start to mention it, not as a children's night, but as a night for young people to play pranks, to tell ghost stories, to laugh in the dark. And oh, the pranks! A farmer might wake up to find his wagon on the roof of a barn. Someone might remove the front gate of a neighbor's fence and hide it in a tree. Barrels might be rolled into the street, chairs switched from porch to porch. It was called Mischief Night. And though it sounds troublesome, most people took it with good humor, at least when it didn't go too far. But even then, the holiday was still caught between two worlds, part sacred, part playful, part old world superstition, part new world fun. Churches began to blend old Celtic ideas with Christian ones. All Saints' Day was on November 1st, and Halloween, the night before, became a kind of gentle balance, a time to remember the dead, but also to laugh at fear. People began holding autumn gatherings, social events filled with apples, cider, nuts, and games. Children bobbed for apples in barrels of water, while adults shared ghost stories or played music by lamplight. It was a celebration of harvest and hearth, of the turning seasons, and the comfort of being together. And slowly, the pumpkin appeared. In the American fields, Irish immigrants discovered these large, soft, golden fruits, so much easier to carve than turnips. And so, the jack-o'-lantern was reborn. They carved faces into pumpkins and set candles inside to light porches and windows. At first, it was simple, just a glow in the darkness. But soon, it became a symbol, the friendly guardian of Halloween. By the late 1800s, Halloween was no longer just a whisper of old Celtic myth. It had become an American tradition, half ancient, half modern, and full of the same curiosity that had always haunted the night. So, if you were to walk through an American town in, say, 1885, you might see children running in simple homemade costumes, carrying small lanterns carved from pumpkins, and hear laughter echoing through the cool October air. No candy yet, no store-bought masks, just the faint, comforting crackle of leaves and the flicker of firelight in every home. Halloween had crossed an ocean, and with it the human love for mystery, for laughter in the dark, and for the feeling that maybe, just maybe, the world beyond isn't so far away after all.
The year is somewhere around 1875. The air smells like apples and chimney smoke. The trees stand bare against a silver moon. And in nearly every small town, there's a quiet excitement running through the streets because Halloween is coming. By now, Halloween has changed. It's no longer just for immigrants, and no longer a night for quiet fortune-telling by the fire. Now it belongs to the whole town. Children gather in small groups, their boots crunching over fallen leaves. Some carry tiny lanterns, perhaps just a candle inside a tin can with holes punched through it. The older boys are whispering about pranks, the younger ones about ghosts. But inside the houses, the adults are preparing too. Parlors are being decorated with autumn leaves, tables set with bowls of nuts and apples, and someone always has a fiddle ready. A Halloween party in the 1800s wasn't loud or commercial. It was warm, neighborly, and full of old-fashioned charm. In one corner, there's a game called Snap Apple. A large apple is hung from a string, swinging gently. Players, hands behind their backs, must catch the apple with their teeth. Laughter fills the room as the fruit swings and dodges away. Next to that is bobbing for apples. A wooden tub full of cold water, apples floating like tiny boats under candlelight. Someone leans in, hair falling forward, trying to bite one before it slips away. At another table, the young women play fortune games. They might place hazelnuts in the fire, one for themselves, one for the person they fancy. If the nuts burn quietly together, love will last. If they pop apart, it's time to look elsewhere. Then come the ghost stories. The lights are dimmed, the laughter fades into silence, and an older voice begins, slowly, deliberately. It might be about a woman who saw a light in the graveyard and followed it until it vanished. Or about a man who met a stranger on a lonely road and later learned that the man had died years before. No one screams, no one needs to. It's not that kind of fear. It's the slow, gentle kind that makes your skin prickle and your imagination wander just enough to make you shiver. After the stories, there's music. Fiddles, banjos, maybe a piano if the family is lucky. They sing songs about the harvest, about home, and about the turning year. And when the night grows late, the guests walk home under the moon, their lanterns swaying softly in the breeze. But outside, the mischief has begun. In some towns, boys remove wagon wheels, tie gates together, or write chalk messages on fences. A few might stretch a string across the road, just high enough to startle a rider's horse. It's mischief, not malice, a night for harmless tricks and laughter. But sometimes the tricks go too far. By the 1880s, newspapers begin to complain. They write about rowdy youths tipping over outhouses, throwing cabbages at windows, or lifting porch steps just to watch the confusion in the morning. But for most people, it was part of the fun, a harmless echo of the mischief night that had traveled across the ocean. And amid the mischief and laughter, a deeper feeling lingered, the sense that Halloween was still somehow connected to something older and wiser. Many families still set an extra place at the table, just in case a spirit wandered by. Some still believed that a candle in the window could guide lost souls home. And if a breeze passed suddenly through the room, someone might whisper, "An old friend is visiting." Because even with all the laughter, Halloween in the 1800s was never only about fun. It was a night when people felt close to something unseen, a thread between the living and the dead, woven through firelight, stories, and superstition. As the night drew to a close, lanterns dimmed, fires sank into embers, and the town grew quiet again. The pranks would be forgiven by morning, and the world would turn once more toward winter.
By the late 1800s, America was changing quickly. Cities were growing tall and bright. Factories roared, trains whistled, and the quiet farmlands of old were giving way to busy streets. Halloween, too, was changing. In the countryside, it was still about stories and firesides, but in towns and cities, a new kind of celebration began to stir. The nights were noisier now, laughter echoing through alleyways, the scent of roasted nuts and kerosene lamps filling the autumn air. And somewhere in all that sound and smoke, the first costumes appeared. They weren't what we know today. No superheroes, no store-bought masks. They were homemade. Scraps of old dresses, flour sacks, and pieces of curtain turned into something mysterious. Children and teenagers would cover their faces with soot, paper masks or veils, and wander the streets as shadows. It was called guising. The idea came from Ireland and Scotland, where people once dressed in disguise to confuse wandering spirits, so that no ghost could recognize them. But in the bustling streets of 1880s America, the disguises took on a new life. Groups of young people went door to door, sometimes singing or reciting rhymes, sometimes performing small tricks or jokes. And though no one called it trick-or-treating yet, they often received something small in return, a bit of cake, an apple, or a coin. It was part mischief, part merriment, and a reflection of a world that was beginning to blend the old with the new. Inside the homes, meanwhile, Halloween parties became the height of polite entertainment. Magazines like Harper's Bazaar and Ladies' Home Journal began publishing guides on how to host the perfect Halloween evening. They suggested decorations, corn stalks, pumpkins, candles, and wreaths of autumn leaves. They printed menus for harvest suppers, pumpkin pies, roasted nuts, cider punch, and molasses taffy. And they included pages of games and riddles that promised laughter, friendship, and a few harmless scares. It became, strangely enough, a fashionable holiday. Society ladies in New York and Boston threw Halloween masquerades with lace masks, orange ribbons, and flickering chandeliers. College students held spooky socials, half flirtation, half folklore. And even ministers wrote sermons about the value of facing fear with faith and humor. The ghost stories never disappeared, of course, but they became gentler, less about restless spirits and more about imagination. Children read about friendly ghosts in storybooks, and adults recited poems that romanticized the autumn night. The focus shifted from spirits of the dead to the spirit of fun. And yet, beneath all the laughter, a small trace of the old Halloween still lingered. When the moon rose full and pale, and the wind moved through the trees just right, someone might still say, "The veil is thin tonight," because no matter how many costumes and candles appeared, the heart of Halloween, that blend of mystery, play, and remembrance, never quite went away. So imagine it. The year is 1895. Children in simple paper masks run laughing through the gaslit streets. Lanterns glow in every window. In a parlor somewhere, a piano plays softly while people sip cider. And outside, the air smells of pumpkins, apples, and chimney smoke. That was Halloween at the dawn of the modern age. Still magical, still human, still halfway between fear and fun.
By the 1890s, Halloween had found its rhythm in America. It was no longer a wild countryside night filled with ghosts and superstition, but a cozy candlelit celebration, a night of games, sweets, and secret glances. And at the heart of it all was a strange but beloved tradition, the taffy pull. It was simple, really. Sugar, molasses, butter, a bit of vinegar, boiled together until it became thick and golden. When it cooled just enough to handle, people, usually young men and women, gathered around a big table and began to pull the taffy. You had to stretch it, fold it, stretch it again, over and over until it turned light and chewy. But of course, the real purpose wasn't just candy, it was connection. Fingers brushed, laughter filled the room, and more than one shy glance was exchanged over a sticky ribbon of sugar. It was the perfect excuse for a little innocent closeness, and in a society where polite manners ruled, Halloween became a safe space for something playful, a little bit daring. Magazines of the time even encouraged it. They called the taffy pull an excellent amusement for a mixed company. It was wholesome enough to seem proper, but everyone knew the real fun was in the flirtation. Meanwhile, the games continued. There were apple-bobbing bowls shimmering under lamplight, candles balanced in darkened corners, and mirrors that promised to reveal one's future husband or wife. One popular ritual went like this. A girl would walk backwards up a staircase at midnight, holding a candle in one hand and a mirror in the other. If she was lucky or unlucky, she might see the face of her future love appear behind her. It sounds silly now, but back then, when electric lights were rare and the night was truly dark, it felt real. The combination of candlelight, superstition, and imagination made anything seem possible. Even the most practical people, farmers, clerks, school teachers, allowed themselves a little wonder on Halloween night. And outside, the air was alive with sound. Children in masks ran laughing between houses. Someone played a fiddle down the street. Pumpkins glowed faintly on wooden steps, their carved faces more friendly than frightening. It wasn't about horror, not yet. It was about mystery, about the pleasure of pretending, and about bringing a little magic into the ordinary. As the century came to a close, Halloween had become something entirely its own. No longer Irish, Scottish, or English, but American. A mixture of old folklore,
small-town fun, and the irresistible sweetness of shared laughter. So, if you close your eyes, you can almost hear it. The hum of conversation, the rustle of skirts, the sticky stretch of taffy between laughing hands. It's Halloween 1899, a night of sugar and smiles, where love and superstition dance together in the candlelight.
The 1800s were ending, and the new century was almost here. You could feel it in the air, that quiet excitement, that sense that the world was about to become faster, louder, and more modern. Gas lamps were being replaced by electric bulbs, their glow steady and white. Cities like New York, Chicago, and Boston flickered to life after dark. And Halloween, once a simple evening of games and superstition, was starting to sparkle under the new light. But something else was happening too. With every passing year, Halloween was becoming rowdier. The same young people who had once played games and pulled taffy were now taking to the streets with a little more energy and a lot more mischief. Newspapers from the late 1890s tell funny, almost innocent stories. Boys tipping over outhouses, tying door handles together, or swapping neighbors' porch furniture just to cause confusion. It wasn't cruel, not yet. It was just Halloween mischief, a way for people, especially the young, to let off steam before winter. And adults, for the most part, took it in stride. Some even played along, leaving out apples or coins as peace offerings to keep their fences unbroken and their windows unsoaped. At the same time, the taffy pulls and parlor games continued indoors. Families decorated with pumpkins and paper bats, and guests arrived in their best autumn clothes. Music filled the rooms, fiddles, pianos, laughter. The games grew fancier, and even department stores began to sell Halloween decorations. For the first time, people started to think of Halloween as something worth celebrating on purpose, not just observing. It was no longer only about spirits or fortune-telling, but about fun, community, and a dash of mystery. Still, the night kept its old heart. Candles flickered in hollowed-out pumpkins, a tradition that had crossed the ocean and taken root. And somewhere, someone still whispered about ghosts, because no Halloween ever quite lost its ghosts. Imagine walking through a small American town in 1898. The wooden sidewalks creak under your boots, pumpkin lanterns flicker on porches, and laughter drifts through the cold night air. Children dart across the street in simple disguises, paper masks, shawls, old hats. You pass a window glowing with yellow light, where a family is bobbing for apples, and someone's grandmother is telling a story about the will-o'-the-wisps that once danced in the Irish bogs. It feels both old and new, a night balanced perfectly between the centuries. And as you walk on, you realize Halloween isn't really about fear at all. It's about imagination. The one night each year when everyone, from children to adults, can pretend to be something else. When you can laugh in the dark and remember that even in the unknown, there's beauty.
As the 20th century dawned, the old century quietly faded behind it, like the last flicker of a candle before sunrise. But some things, like Halloween, refused to disappear. Instead, the holiday bloomed moon. The years between 1900 and 1910 saw Halloween transformed from a rustic night of tricks and whispers into something elegant, social, and even beautiful. It began with postcards. delicate, colorful illustrations that turned Halloween into art. Imagine this. A hand-painted card, mailed in 1905, shows a smiling pumpkin with rosy cheeks, a black cat perched on top, and a rhyme written beneath in curling golden ink. "'Tis Halloween when fairies dance, and witches fly by moonlit chance." These postcards were everywhere. People sent them to friends, to family, to sweethearts, just like Valentine's cards or Christmas greetings. They were warm, playful, and a little mischievous. Artists like Ellen Clapsaddle became famous for their Halloween illustrations, gentle witches with kind eyes, children carrying pumpkins, and ghosts that looked more curious than scary. It was a softer Halloween, full of charm instead of chills. And beyond the postcards, the parties grew grander. Victorian parlor games remained, apple bobbing, fortune-telling, candle tricks. But now there were new additions, masquerades, musical chairs, and costume contests. Magazines and department stores helped shape it all. They printed guides for how to host a Halloween social, complete with recipes for pumpkin pie, instructions for homemade decorations, and costume ideas inspired by folklore and fairy tales. In small towns, schools began hosting Halloween gatherings for children. There were paper bats, cut-out black cats, and streamers of orange and black. Teachers told legends, not to frighten, but to entertain. Ghost stories had become family-friendly. But outside, the mischief still hummed. Teenagers roamed the streets with soap, chalk, and mischief in their eyes. They drew faces on windows, tied laundry lines together, and sometimes let loose the farmers' chickens just for fun. It was harmless chaos, part rebellion, part tradition. And while the adults might sigh and scold, deep down they knew this was all part of what made Halloween special. It was a night of permission, a night when the ordinary rules of life could bend just a little, when you could wear a mask and say things you normally wouldn't, when a school teacher could dance, a shopkeeper could play a trick, and a child could believe in ghosts, if only for one enchanted evening. So Halloween moved gracefully through the 1900s, its roots still tangled in the folklore of the 1800s, but its branches stretching towards something brighter, something American, a celebration not of death, but of imagination. If you close your eyes now, you can almost hear the sound of that new century, the shuffle of paper cards, the laughter of guests, the rustle of silk costumes under candlelight. The ghosts are smiling, the pumpkins glow warmly, and Halloween, once just a whisper of the harvest, has become a full, golden song, Pumpkin.
By the time the First World War arrived in 1914, the laughter of late Victorian Halloween had started to fade into something quieter. Young men went off to battle. Families worried. Communities learned the heavy weight of silence and waiting. And yet, even then, on October nights, candles still flickered in carved pumpkins. Children still whispered ghost stories under blankets. Because sometimes, holding on to a bit of tradition is a way of holding on to hope. Halloween parties became smaller. Sugar was rationed, so the mountains of candy and taffy from the old days disappeared. Instead, families made simple treats: baked apples, popcorn balls, and molasses cookies sweetened with what little they had. Neighbors gathered by lamplight instead of lanterns, sharing stories that weren't just about spirits anymore, but about courage, loss, and endurance. When the war finally ended and peace returned, the joy of Halloween came rushing back like breath after holding it too long. In the 1920s, parades, dances, and costume contests filled the towns again. It was as if people needed to remind themselves that life could still be fun, still be bright, still be filled with laughter in the dark. The old mischief returned too, but it had changed. Teenagers were bolder now. With cars, radios, and electric streetlights, Halloween began to sprawl out of the parlor and into the streets. By the late 1920s, some towns had to form Halloween committees to keep pranks from turning into vandalism. One newspaper headline from 1927 read, "Halloween spirit out of hand. Youths turn tricks into terrors." Still, underneath all the mischief, the real heart of Halloween remained the same, a mix of play, nostalgia, and warmth. Then came the Second World War. Once again, the lights dimmed. This time, entire cities practiced blackouts, turning off streetlights to stay safe during air raids. Even jack-o'-lanterns were forbidden in some places, their cheerful glow seen as too risky. And yet, people still found a way. Children drew pumpkins on paper instead of carving them. Parents organized tiny living room parties. And candy, when it could be found, was shared like treasure. Because even when the world was uncertain, Halloween meant something steady, a promise that imagination couldn't be taken away. When the war ended in 1945, Halloween came roaring back to life again. Neighborhoods filled with music and laughter again. Costumes, candy, parades, all returned and brighter than ever. And that's when the modern world began to notice what had been there all along. Halloween wasn't just an old superstition from Europe. It was a living tradition, one that adapted, survived, and brought joy in the darkest of times. So even in those years of fear and rationing, Halloween stayed kind. It stayed human. It whispered, "Don't be afraid of the dark. There's still light here."
The year is 1947. The soldiers have come home. The cities are alive again. And in neighborhoods across America, children are stepping outside in paper masks and makeshift costumes, carrying little brown bags and big hopes for candy. This was the beginning of something magical, the birth of trick-or-treating. It didn't happen overnight. In truth, it was a gentle blending of old traditions, the Irish and Scottish guising, the American habit of Halloween pranks, and the post-war baby boom that filled towns with children once more. Magazines and radio shows started to talk about this new way of celebrating. Communities loved it because it took the chaos out of Halloween and replaced it with something sweet and safe. Instead of pranks and vandalism, children were encouraged to visit homes politely, say the magic words "trick or treat," and receive candy in return. By the early 1950s, the phrase was everywhere. Cartoons, comic books, even Walt Disney made Halloween specials about it. Candy companies saw an opportunity, and soon, every October, shop windows gleamed with bright wrappers, chocolate bars, and sugar-coated dreams. It was the golden age of Halloween. Front porches glowed with jack-o'-lanterns. The smell of caramel apples filled the air, and children's laughter spilled down every block like music. The costumes changed too. No longer just old sheets or homemade masks. Now there were store-bought outfits made of shiny plastic with painted faces of cowboys, witches, skeletons, and movie heroes. For parents who had lived through years of war and worry,
Watching their children run through safe, bright neighborhoods felt like healing. The old Halloween, the one with whispers of spirits and lost souls, was now a night of innocence and delight. Of course, there were still ghost stories, but they were the kind told around campfires. Stories that made children squeal and then giggle, safe in the knowledge that monsters weren't real. Radio programs and early television shows began to fill the season with spooky sound effects, creaking doors, and laughter. It became a theatrical kind of fear, one meant to be enjoyed, not believed. Still, hidden under all the fun, the echoes of the old world lingered quietly, a shadow behind the laughter. The flicker of a candle in a pumpkin still carried something ancient, a reminder that this night had once been about remembering the dead, about facing the unknown with courage. But now it was about something else too, togetherness. Halloween had become a celebration of community, of shared sweetness in the dark. And as the 1950s rolled into the 1960s, Halloween's glow spread through pop culture, in songs, movies, and every child's imagination. It was no longer just a holiday, it was a feeling. Warm, orange, and endless. Imagine it now. A small American town under the amber light of street lamps, crunching leaves underfoot, costumed children running door to door, parents waving from porches, and somewhere a record player spinning soft jazz through an open window. That was Halloween reborn, a gentle kind of magic, wrapped in candy wrappers and laughter. Atuk.
By the time the 1960s and 1970s arrived, Halloween had fully transformed. What began as whispered fortune-telling, flickering turnip lanterns, and candlelit gatherings had grown into a nationwide celebration. Children ran through suburban streets in colorful costumes, holding bags that overflowed with candy. Porches glowed with carved pumpkins. Windows were draped in cobwebs, and decorations of ghosts, witches, and black cats filled the yards. The old traditions hadn't disappeared entirely. They had simply blended into something new. Fortune-telling and ghost stories remained, but alongside them came costumes inspired by movies, television, and pop culture. Bobbing for apples became more a game than a divination. Candy, now abundant and colorful, replaced much of the old sweets made at home. Yet underneath all the modern sparkle, the heart of Halloween remained the same. A night of imagination, community, and playful suspense. And if you look closely, you can still trace the line back. The turnip lanterns of Ireland became pumpkins on porches. The games of chance and fortune evolved into parties and costume contests. The mischief and pranks became trick-or-treating, gentle and sweet. And the soft whispers of the supernatural still float through the night, even if now they come wrapped in candy and laughter. Halloween had traveled across oceans and centuries, through foggy villages and bustling cities, through wars and rationed candy, through Victorian parlor games and suburban neighborhoods. It survived because people loved it, because it was human. It reminded them to play, to imagine, to be a little mischievous and a little brave. It connected generations, children with parents, parents with grandparents, and even the long-gone souls remembered on All Hallows' Eve. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, think of the quiet streets of 1800s Ireland, of turnips glowing with candlelight,
of whispered fortunes and taffy goals, of gas lamps flickering on cobblestones, and of children running under the first electric streetlights. Halloween is more than candy and costumes. It's a living memory, a gentle thread through history, binding curiosity, laughter, and the human love of a little magic. Close your eyes. Feel the glow of the pumpkin lanterns, hear the soft rustle of autumn leaves, and let the whispers of the past carry you into dreamland. Good night, Pumpkin Moon.